The long-term plan of the China-Pakistan economic corridor was revealed on Monday. What are the priorities and can these ambitious goals be achieved? And 4 Chinese nationals were rescued from abductors in Nigeria last week. As Chinese presence grows in the world, including in high-risk regions, how can safety be guaranteed? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The Pakistani Minister for Planning and Development announced the much-anticipated long-term plan for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, on Monday during a ceremony broadcast live on TV. Government officials, business representatives and academics attended the ceremony in Islamabad. Making the long-term plan public was a commitment made by the ministry back in June. Now, the 2,000-kilometer-long corridor, with an estimated investment of over $50 billion has been described as a flagship project of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the Minister for Planning and Development, Iqbal, announced the ambitious goals for the project over the next 15 years. When others were walking away from investing in Pakistan, China stepped in, he said, for which Pakistan will forever feel indebted. So what exactly are these ambitious goals announced on Monday? Are they too ambitious or idealistic? I'm joined in Beijing by Professor Zheng Jianping, Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and in Islamabad by Mr. Sultan Ali, a writer and security analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mr. Ali, first, please explain what are the highlights of the goals that have been mentioned, that have been made public today during the ceremony.
Well, I'm indebted to you for inviting me to your show because it is an extremely important topic. You're welcome. And as you mentioned, we had been waiting, I would say patiently, for the plan to be unveiled because there had been the whole of Pakistan is, of course, looking forward to it, but there had been certain doubting Thomases who were, worried, as you rightly pointed out, whether the plan is going to be very ambitious, too ambitious, whether Pakistan will be able to handle it, and so on. So this unveiling of the plan has given a very large amount of clarity to it, starting with the definition. What is CPEC? Then the vision and goals, and then the modalities, the financial support structures. These are so clearly defined as if it seems a SWOT analysis like we teach in management, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats has been carried out, and all these have been now clearly defined. So not only the people of Pakistan but also the people of the region and people who would like to invest in it will be able to clearly see what it means, and it covers a very large array of projects, not too ambitious, but they are all doable. And they range from not only, there is a 1+4 axis where CPEC is the core, but it revolves around 4 different aspects which happen to be energy, which happen to be transportation, which also happen to be industrial cooperation. So these are aspects which are going to make this project. It was sometimes felt it was a misnomer. Some people thought China-Pakistan economic corridor is just a corridor or a road, but it turns out that it has a very large canvas in which industry, agriculture, information technology, everything will be there.
We also heard the mentioning of this Vision 2025 for Pakistan. What is the position, what is the meaning of that phrase here in the long-term plan of the CPEC, Mr. Ali?
Well, you see, the long-term, CPEC itself, let me very briefly tell you that the short-term objectives are supposed to be met by 2020, the mid-term by 2025, and the long-term by 2030. Now, the Minister Iqbal earlier had given Pakistan a Vision 2025, which was Pakistan's vision of how Pakistan is going to develop economically, industrially, and as well as put its place on the map. Now, it so happens that Pakistan's Vision 2025 is a very happy marriage with the CPEC, and therefore it will be a fruition of two different dreams but having the same results, the same meanings and the same fruition.
Mr. Zhang, coming back to the Chinese perspective, explain a little bit the story behind the convening of such an idea. Why is this paper important? What is China's role here behind the drafting of this plan?
Okay. Actually, for developing economies, medium and long-term plan is very important. If you look at China in the past, based on very successfully, 5-year plan and medium and long-term plan, and China can, concentrate so lot of, capital and all type of resources, and focusing on both economic and social development, and then China make very high speed, achieve progress.
Mm-hmm.
For Pakistan, I'm very happy to see they also have their relative department. They can do this type of planning by themselves. Of course, from Chinese side, we provided our consultancy, and especially for CPEC cooperation, from Chinese side, we can work with the Pakistan side, working together and making, a very feasible, targets in medium and long term. Also, that for those detailed industries and those development projects, and then we can work together. For example, for tourism sectors, actually, their plan already provided, 5 tourism, zones in the future. Also, for Gwadar port development, as well as in power stations development, something like that. So, generally speaking, by very comprehensive social and economic development, I do believe that Pakistan will have stable and fast development pace in the future.
Well, you talked about the Gwadar port. There has been some debates in the press in Pakistan, for instance, about the division of profits for that port once it is in operation. Some people are saying it is too biased to China because China is taking 91%, whereas only 9% is giving to the Pakistani side. Mr. Hali, how do you understand this issue?
Well, actually, this particular ratio is not new. This ratio had been decided when earlier the port of Gwadar had been given on a contract to the Singapore agency, and now that the China Harbour Company has acquired the rights to this, so this is a continuation of the same. My particular interpretation is, and I visited the site of the port of Gwadar and also the allied projects. True that 91% will accrue to China and 9% only to Pakistan, which is a cause of worry to some people who do not understand the entirety of the project. Now, you see, allied with the project of the port, there are so many other development opportunities, which include the international airport which is coming up, which includes the oil refineries, which includes the roads, the railways, and so on. They are not in a division of 91% to 9%, and if China is taking 91% because it is also investing the majority of the development funds required for it. So I personally think in a way it is fair, and we should look at the complete picture and not only one corner of it and exclaim that this is unfair or this is fair.
Another worry, let me cut in here. Another worry is about political uncertainty. That for China it's a different story, but for Pakistan you have elections, you have different leaders, you have some certain political uncertainty. Mr. Zhang, do you think such a long-term plan is implementable in Pakistan given the political system there?
If you look at relationship between China and Pakistan in the past, even if there is instability, political instability in Pakistan, but I think that the diplomatic relationship as well as the economic and social relationship between two countries still keeping, very good atmosphere. Also, that because between China and Pakistan, actually in the long term, we already formulated a very good feeling and a very good, very solid foundation for every aspect. Especially, in 2004, between China and Pakistan, we also signed a bilateral free trade agreement. And recently, we started to upgrade this FTA by negotiations. And then today, by CPEC, cooperation, I do believe that China and Pakistan already, on the new stage for cooperation. So and then, even if the political situation, maybe there is something change, but I don't think that will impact on two countries' relationship.
So the foundation is already very solid. Mr. Hali, my last question, did the long-term plan say anything about inclusiveness of this corridor, that companies from third countries can participate in this project?
In fact, that is the redeeming factor. People, were misconstruing that this is a project which is only between China and Pakistan. But the fact is that both China and Pakistan have invited third countries, the entire region, in fact, the entire world. And the special economic zones, for example, they are not restricted to Chinese investors or to Pakistani investors. International investors can come in and they will be able to benefit from the special conditions that will be provided to them, and which will become actually a win-win situation for the whole world. Now, for example, let me tell you, our eastern neighbor, India, has been critical of this particular project, but perhaps it has also missed the big picture, because if it participates, it can benefit immensely, and there are a few other detractors who have been looking at it critically. But now the field is open, and anyone can come in and they can take full benefits from this particular project, which I think will be beneficial for not only for Pakistan or China, but for the entire region, nay, the whole world.
Thank you very much. Actually, Qatar's investment company Al Mirkab has already joined this corridor, and Iran also reiterated its interest in the CPEC. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to our two guests, Professor Zhang Jianping, Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Sultan Hali, a writer and security analyst in Islamabad. And here is my first point. The Belt and Road Initiative is not the modern version of the Silk Road. The regions along the routes not only interact more actively, it's also an innovation to facilitate international cooperation proposed by China, which could benefit local economies through investment in trade, infrastructure and sectors such as energy and tourism. While China is trying to cooperate with regions along these routes, China will not follow any colonial practices, let alone trying to set up any entities similar to the East India Company. This is the 21st century. The regions along the Belt and Road are also sovereign countries. They will weigh independently the pros and cons of doing business with China while being accountable to their own voters. China is only sharing with these less developed countries how China achieved economic development without losing its independence to outside pressure or outside interests. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. The Nigerian military rescued 4 Chinese nationals last Saturday, abducted in the south of the country. An army spokesman confirmed that some of the Chinese were injured by their kidnappers and have been receiving treatment in a local hospital. Now, they were traveling to the southern state of Ondo from the commercial hub of Lagos when they were kidnapped. In recent years, the number of Chinese nationals ensnared in security situations overseas has been on the rise, bringing greater challenges for the Chinese government. So can China better guarantee the safety of its nationals overseas? What needs to be done in collaboration with local governments? Joining me from Paris is Professor Douglas Yates, and an expert on African politics at the American Graduate School in Paris, and here in the studio, Professor Zhang Jingshi, Vice President of the China Naval Research Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Zhang, a Nigerian army spokesman said the rescue work of the kidnapped Chinese nationals on Friday was conducted by the Nigerian military. So exactly what happened? Do we have some information?
Well, I think the 4 Chinese nationals really were on their way to workstations traveling in the 7 riverine regions of Nigeria. Actually, during the last 1 or 2 decades, such kind of kidnappings have been happening very frequently, and it is reported that since 2006, the Nigerian military has been taking out anti-piracy actions in this area, but we still see that many pirate activities happened very frequently, and I think these kind of activities are carried out mainly for money.
Mainly for money. What can the Chinese government do here, Professor Zhang?
Well, I think the Chinese government, especially the embassy and the consul in Nigeria, have done their best to cooperate with the Nigerian government and also the Nigerian military to rescue the Chinese nationals. And up to now, that the Chinese government mainly relies on the local governments to deal with such kind of pirate activities. Mm-hmm. We have to respect the sovereignty of the local governments.
Yeah, Professor Yates, in recent years, as Professor Zhang mentioned, more and more Chinese nationals have been kidnapped overseas or come under attack. What is your take on the reasons behind, this action of more Chinese being targeted?
Well, in the case of Nigeria, and I'm just going to specify that what I'm saying is for piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, the Chinese are not particularly being targeted. What has happened is over the past 2 years, since 2016, there has been a rebel movement rising up in the Niger Delta. It goes by many names, but the popular name now is the Niger Delta Avengers. And they've been attacking Chevron, ExxonMobil, ENI, AGIP, the Italian company, Royal Dutch Shell, and they've been attacking pipelines, offshore platforms. And in the last 2 years, as oil prices plummeted, they've shifted from hijacking cargoes of oil to kidnapping and taking hostages oil workers. And what they found is with the drop in the price of oil, they can make more money and have a better return on investment hijacking workers and getting the companies to pay for them.
What is a good, acceptable way to deal with this kind of hijacking, Professor Yates? From the international experience, what do other governments normally do? And Professor Zhang, I'm going to ask you to add later what has been the Chinese stance on this.
Well, we can learn some lessons from Somali piracy. Some of the big lessons we've learned is having military escorts with ships is somewhat effective. If the governments of the world are willing to pay for flotillas to protect commerce, that helps. It's discouraging, but it's not enough. The main lesson that the military forces of the world have learned in trying to control Somali piracy is that the pirates are a symptom of underdevelopment, of poverty. And in this region of Nigeria, if you want to stop piracy, you have to offer the people real alternatives. The oil industry has destroyed fishing in that region. The oil industry has polluted their drinking water, taken mangrove forests that used to provide an easy livelihood, and made unbearable living conditions. And those people are the ones who then become pirates. and piracy simply pays more than some of these subsistence activities. So the big lesson of Somalia is you have to promote development if you want to fight piracy at its roots.
Professor Zhang, what has been China's stance on such kidnapping issues, and is China also doing some work in providing the much needed development Professor Yates mentioned?
Yes, I agree with the professor. Actually, the Chinese government has been very active in fighting piracy and also other kind of crimes overseas. The Chinese PR Navy has dispatched 28 flotillas of warships to the Gulf of Aden and waters of Somalia to fight piracy, and also the international cooperation among the navies, about 20 also navies conducting anti-piracy operations there is successful. But I think that in dealing with such kind of crimes, especially piracy, we should take comprehensive measures, not only militarily, but also economically and also culturally. We should provide other assistance to the local people.
Sure.
And the Chinese government has done so.
Yeah, but looking ahead, looking at the challenges for consular services providers, what kind of challenges, Professor Yates, do you think the Chinese government is faced with? I mean, every year we have 120 million visits, trips made by Chinese nationals overseas, you know, and not to mention the people who are sent abroad to study, to work, to live. What kind of challenge do you think the Chinese government is faced with at this particular moment?
Yeah, right. Well, on the African continent, there are many Chinese present in countries where they're not going to be hijacked, where they don't face security risks. They're building infrastructure, they're conducting mining enterprises. But when you get to the Gulf of Guinea, this oil-rich region, there you've got piracy, and there you have a high security risk for those Chinese workers. So I think what China's approach should be to distinguish different areas where these 2 million Chinese workers spread around the world are present. And when it comes to the Gulf of Aden, or when it comes to the Gulf of Guinea, there need to be proactive measures, for example, providing insurance. There's no getting around the fact that eventually you're going to have to pay ransom to get your personnel back. So providing insurance for these workers when they head into these zones of risk and zones of danger. Also, China has the ability to help these governments, which are often poor and poorly governed, to get patrol boats, to get the technology they need to protect their areas, not only from piracy, but also where you have piracy, you have illegal fishing. And these patrol boats will help these governments to get control of their sovereign waters. You do want to work with those local governments. There's no getting around the sovereignty issues. Private security has a limitation. It's only so legal. So perhaps, as China has already been doing, helping Nigeria to beef up its patrol boat fleet would help enormously in fighting piracy. Much of this is carried on low-tech by speedboats and ladders. These things could be handled effectively from a military point of view by a stronger Nigerian Navy.
Professor Zhang, your take on the issue?
Well, I think Chinese government will adhere to 3 principles to send their naval forces or military forces to other countries. First, we should get a resolution of UN Security Council. And second, we should get the consent of the relevant countries or the coastal countries, just as we have done in the Gulf of Aden and waters of Somalia. Third, I think we have to take a guess or examine our power capability. Now, I think since 2008, Chinese have sent flotillas of 3 warships in the Gulf of Aden. And this has been a very great burden for the Chinese Navy. But in the future, if there are requests from the local governments, I think the Chinese government may think over sending some patrol boats to the local areas to patrol on the rivers there. But first, we have to get the consent of the local governments.
Right, but at this moment, just very briefly to clarify, what is China's ultimate goal of developing a strong navy here, Professor Zhang?
Well, I think the first aim is to safeguard our homeland. The second, with the development of the Chinese naval capability, we will shoulder more and more international responsibilities and duties, such as the escort operations in the Gulf of Aden.
Okay, actually when China evacuates its own citizens, its own nationals, it also helps other nationals, right, who are needed to help. And this was obvious in the case in 2011, for instance, when we evacuated some 35,000 Chinese from Libya. We also helped some 2,000 foreign nationals. They were also safely evacuated from the conflict zones. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to our two guests, Professor Douglas Yates, an expert on African politics at the American Graduate School in Paris, and here in the studio, Professor Zhang Jingshe, Vice President of China Naval Research Institute. And here is my last point. Given the sheer number of Chinese traveling abroad or studying or working abroad, but also the growing number of Chinese employed in high-risk corners of the world, it is inevitable that more and more Chinese will be swept up in abductions, attacks, and crisis situations. These incidents can and will happen, and the Chinese government's work is extremely instrumental and important in guaranteeing security for its citizens. It's not an easy task, as it started from a low level. I remember when I was traveling in Europe back in 2002 and my passport was stolen. At the time, I had very little support from the Chinese consulate service. And now, Chinese citizens can count on their country's protection in cases of social disorder, conflict, and natural disasters. This has happened while the volume of Chinese interactions with the outside world has grown exponentially. Therefore, the improvements and investments made by the Chinese government in this regard is indeed commendable. Looking ahead, the security of Chinese people and interests abroad will face even more obstacles, and protecting China's legitimate overseas interests using legal manners will remain a top priority for the Chinese government. That is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices. Follow me on Facebook or Twitter using the handle The Point with LX, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.